Lying down in her room with the window ajar, Nancy closed her eyes and thought. She tried to remember anything from her childhood with her dad that was a story she could tell Kathy. Only memories of things she didn't want to share with anyone, that she didn't even want to remember herself, pressed up through the ground. She stamped out these buds as soon as she recognized their withered stems. She floated through a mental image of the house, pausing and thinking hard to search for any memories, good or bad, in the drawers and cabinets, anything to connect her with Dad, or Aldergrove, or Kathy, or anything of this place. She'd learned enough pop psychology to suspect it might be suppression through trauma, but thought to herself, it couldn't have been so traumatic. I'm a functioning woman. There must be some memories I've kept. Maybe the issues I've not thought about that time, that life, or talked to anyone about them, told anyone for years, 20? But Kathy, sure, I've got memories for you, but not to be told to you. I'll tell you how your brother was after she died. God rest her soul. I'll tell you some. I wonder if I ever wrote them down. I would have. My diary. Nancy sat up and looked around her room. She looked in her desk drawer, under her bed, on the shelf at the top of her wardrobe. Nothing. She looked behind the desk and in her chest of drawers. No diary. She paused and thought, very motherly, where did I last have it? Which made her realize it was probably the last night she was here. I'd have packed it, surely, which made her think of where she'd gone with it. She doubted it would have come with her all the way to London or to France, Germany, and certainly not as far as Australia. She had no memory of it in those places. It felt like it was still in Ireland, nearby maybe. Suddenly, in the way only memories do, the image of her sitting in the Kebble by the loch shore overnight struck her on the forehead like a splash of cold water in the morning. There she had sat, in that dingy old place with water dripping in the opposite corner. She worried about creepy crawlies and all sorts of creatures of the night coming for her, and she wrote in her wee pink diary with the make-believe lock, that night in complete darkness, huddled to a corner, invisible to the house, and invisible even to Sam if he had come to it and looked inside too. And although she was unable to see what she wrote that night, and could not remember it now sitting again on her bed, she knew she had written something in that book, something near the back, with all the pages before it full of other memories, no doubt, that she could not remember, but that she'd written them. Meanwhile, Nancy had thrown a coat over her pajamas and put on some 2 big boots she had found by the back door. She wanted to retrace the start of the journey she'd made all those years ago in the hopes of finding her diary that she'd lost along the way in her hurry. She remembered how she had opened the front door so that Sam would search out that way first, if at all, before going out through the kitchen in the back. She retraced her old way over the muddy slopped grass in the garden to the wire fence held up with wooden stakes drenched in centuries' water. Past clods of dung, she soon raced along the unmarked path she'd followed in fields towards the loch shore. The cloudless night allowed the moon and stars to dimly light the way. The small hills around were no taller than she and were unsmooth. She could barely see them, but 1 or 2, marked with ancient stone mounds, stood a silhouette in the night against the loch, twinkling in the distance under the near full moon. She went that way, straight as she could, direct to the loch, like she had decades ago. She went past a thrush in a hole in a hedge and heard its small chirps. Then came a screeching from afar. The thrush stopped its cry and fled. Nancy looked to the loch where the sound had come from, and she spotted the Kebble on the shore, a cragged half-building with no roof. It had had a roof the last time Nancy was here, but the Kebble was already then too a deserted building, with rumours spread in school about its lonely inhabitant. She. She walked again to the Kebble by the loch as straight as the mud and clods allowed. A short distance past a small grove, Nancy recalled why she'd chosen it as her hiding place in her escape from Sam. She was right to think when she'd first made this journey that Sam would never look for her in the Kebble or its surrounds. Her parents had told her not to go down there. It was a no-go zone. But she'd also been told, which Nancy had long forgotten until she was walking here this night, that she was never to pick up a comb if she saw one lying around, especially not near that Kebble. Nancy continued on her path over a fence by a ladder stile. The Kebble. It looked different in the night. Nothing had its own shadow here, but was all bathed in one big blotch of it, with the moon to its back past the loch. As she neared it, the smell of still water sitting in the groves, dead fish and decay, and soft lapping waves of foamy water slowed her down. She passed through a stone wool's squeeze stile and saw the dilapidated Kebble not 20 metres away. She watched her feet take each step over brambles strewn across the ground, and she was thankful for the big boots, and in between each step she looked up at the shack to make sure it hadn't moved. She approached it. There was no sound here. No birds tweeted, the crickets shut up, the waves had stopped lapping at the shore just beyond the house. An exposed roof beam creaked for an eternal moment. Nancy looked up at it. When she looked back down, a small shadow sat on the door's threshold. At once small, but also taller than anyone she'd ever seen. And slender. Nancy walked closer still, and saw 100 plaited ropes of russet red hair gently flowing from the young girl's head past her body and down to her feet, wrapping around and under her, giving her a little cushion to sit on, rather than the old, rough wooden plank threshold. Nancy stopped walking now that she saw the young girl clearly. Something about her warned Nancy against getting too close. The girl put her hands on her lap, long porcelain white fingers draped down. She kept her face hidden slightly in shadow. She moved one hand to her gown, a thick green cloak of a thing, and took out a shiny little red alder comb stained, a colour that near blended in with her hair. She took that little tool from top to bottom, her arms bending all which ways to manage to go the entire length of her locks. She did this some dozen or 2 times, then looked up at Nancy. The girl's eyes narrowed upon seeing this grown woman in big boots and great coat. Nancy crumpled at the sudden sound of a piercing screech like an ambulance hitting one ear-melting note. It stopped, the sound, and Nancy stood back up, but the girl was gone. Nancy thought for a moment she must have run away from the fear of that sound or whatever was causing it. She worried that the girl might have run into the loch in the dark, slipped and drowned. So, Nancy ran around the small shack to the shore and saw the girl there. She was a silhouette at first. The shadow of a girl atop a rock interrupting the moonlight coming down in a line across the water's shallow waves behind her. Nancy asked if she was okay. "Did you hear that noise too?" Voices came from all around, like more than one person talking at a time. There's something which you need to know. It was like the wind itself spoke. You will lose that which you will desire. Speak no more. Bellowed 3 voices, one young, one mature, one old, spinning around Nancy like a whirlwind of knowing, and it went on. I have work to do. I have work to do. A man draws, he comes near. Footsteps crushed the brambles around the side of the shack behind Nancy, and she turned to see a young man walking around in dark pleated trousers, a white singlet and suspenders, one up over his shoulder, the other hanging loose by his side. He walked over and embraced the young girl, who hugged him back. He stood in front of a small dinghy with 2 oars. Nancy couldn't remember seeing that just before. The man looked at Nancy and held out a hand, but it was back at his side again by the time Nancy had reached for it. The girl started to bawl and gurn and combed her hair to soothe herself. "Who are you then?" the man asked. "Nancy Simble." "I don't know any Nancy Simble. I don't know you, I don't think. But now that I think of it, I can't remember who I am either. Tell me, can you see me? The people in town today, they looked right through me. Made me feel like I was the invisible man or something. I walked into the corner shop there, the one with Patty behind the counter." "I remember Patty's shop," Nancy said. "But there was a woman in Patty's stead. I didn't recognise her, so I said hello and how do you do and all that there. But she was the rudest thing I ever did encounter. Just plain outright ignored me, then put on her cardigan. Like my opening the door had let in a chill or something. She wouldn't even look at me." The man adjusted his footing and turned slightly. The moonlight lit up half of him. This half of his face was wrinkled and angry, his hand a fist. He adjusted his footing again. With the moonlight to his back, he looked young and wore a soft, restful smile. His hands fell naturally at his sides. "Nice to see someone who'll talk to me," he said. "Been ignored for so long. It's not a nice feeling. I feel like I've not been connected to anything. No one to share anything with. I feel like a distant memory. That's the word. You just said it, I think. I felt like a memory that passed a wee while. Or a dream, maybe. Tell me, do you? He said, then looked over his shoulder to the red-headed girl. Or you? Do either of you remember me from anywhere? The girl and Nancy both softly shook their heads. The girl continued to comb her hair, its strands in the comb both shimmering in the moonlight. There is much unsaid, I believe. Much I could have said but haven't. And much that will always go unsaid. There's much I've done too, although I cannot remember what, that makes me feel guilty. This young girl here, though, she said it will make sense on the other side of the loch. I've never been. Have you? Yes, Nancy said. It was all she could let out. Really? I've not been outside County Antrim before. Tell me, where have you been anyway? But hurry, I don't think I've long before my ferry's off. Well, I've been all around. I've gone to England, Germany, France. France? Cheese-eating surrender monkeys, whatever that means. Nancy laughed once silently through her nose, then said, Yes, and well, Australia too. That's where I live. I always thought that's where she went. Who? Nancy asked. I don't know, the man said. He looked worried or afraid, confused. A girl. A young woman, I think. She's a deathless outline now in my mind. I can't picture her. Her name escapes me too. I think I heard someone in town say it today, but it escapes me nonetheless, much like she did, I think. Although I can't be sure about any of this. My mind's been befuddled a lot recently, playing tricks on me. Sure aren't I after having a fall, said some woman whose name I don't know. Tell me mine, do you know my name? The woman who says I fell wouldn't tell me. Awful rude. I think I do, said Nancy. What is it? Asked the man. A screech surrounded Nancy, who covered her ears and looked at the girl on the rock, then back to the man, who was now in the boat with the girl. Her legs shined in the water now, pearlescent, and stuck close to each other as though bound at knees and ankles. Nancy took a few steps forward. The girl threw part of her green cloak over her legs, obscuring them. She smiled, opening her mouth for the first time, taking out pointed rows of yellow thorns, its outline breaking her face in half like a snake detaching before a meal. This girl thing lifted an arm. Behind Nancy, a roof beam cracked in the Kebble. She jumped from the sudden fright, and just as she turned back to look at the Kebble, a gust came deafening through the air and hit Nancy, flying her backwards across the fields in a breath until Nancy, back first, hurtled through her bedroom window and fell onto her bed. She sat up and went to the open window, looking, with a furrowed brow, for the house on the loch shore, the boat, the man, that girl, but there was nothing there.